terror personified. A name whispered with dread, synonymous with darkness and absolute power in the Harry Potter universe. But what truly drives such a nefarious figure? Behind the dark magic, forbidden spells, and relentless pursuit of domination lies a complex, deeply scarred, and tormented psyche. Prepare for a deep dive into the depths of Voldemort's mind, where the most primal fear of finitude shaped one of the most iconic and psychologically intriguing villains in fantasy literature. What lurks in the shadows of he who must not be named? We'll unravel the layers of his behavior and understand the motivations that drove him to such an extreme, revealing how the absence of a vital element can corrupt a being's very essence. The journey of Tom Riddle, the future Lord Voldemort, begins in a gloomy orphanage, an environment utterly devoid of warmth or affection. From his earliest years, he was confronted with the total absence of love and rejection, crucial elements for a child's healthy development. This foundation of isolation and the early discovery of his magical powers he used to frighten and control others, as we see in stories of minor incidents and abuses with other children in the orphanage, led him down a path of extreme self-reliance. The hostile environment, lacking parental figures or caregivers who could offer security and affection, nurtured a deep distrust of others, causing him to rely solely on his own abilities. For him, the vulnerability of others was a weakness to be exploited, and his own, something to be hidden at all costs. From a psychological perspective, a childhood marked by emotional deprivation and rejection can generate a strong sense of inadequacy and an inner void. This, in turn, leads to a relentless pursuit of validation, or, as in Tom's case, to power and control as a grandiose way to compensate for this lack. He wasn't seeking recognition, but domination to never again feel small or insignificant. The fragility of human existence, the pain of loss, and the inevitability of death seem to have become an obsession from an early age, perhaps by witnessing the fragility of life around him or due to his own uncertain origins, planting the seed for his future and terrible transformation. The absence of healthy parental models and significant social bonds allowed his personality to develop without the moral and ethical breaks that human coexistence normally imposes. He saw the world as a place where force was the only currency, and where vulnerability was a flaw to be eradicated, solidifying his belief that he was an exception. But something more subtle was forming, an almost pathological inability to form genuine bonds and to feel empathy, which went unnoticed by many until it became a dominant characteristic of his essence, making him incapable of understanding love. Despite his desolate childhood, admission to Hogwarts should have been a positive turning point for Tom Riddle. The school, with its promise of knowledge, security, and community, offered an environment where he could develop differently, perhaps finding the connections he lacked. However, for Tom, this new reality only served to confirm and reinforce his view of singularity and superiority. Far from feeling part of something larger, he saw magic as a tool to highlight his exceptionalism and to exert dominance. The discovery of his wizarding lineage, particularly the connection to Salazar Slytherin, led him to completely reject his Muggle heritage, everything he considered weak and mundane, and to delve deeply into the secrets of dark magic and the dark arts, which he saw as the true path to absolute power. This rejection, a part of his identity, and the fascination with what was forbidden acted as triggers for a dark and irreversible transformation. Internally, a latent conflict between the human desire for belonging and the growing conviction of his own exceptionalism intensified. The latter aspect, the desire for limitless power, was the overwhelming victor. Psychology could interpret this change as a defense mechanism against the pain of rejection and depersonalization suffered in childhood, where the exaltation of one's own power and the pursuit of unparalleled status become a grandiose form of compensation, an impenetrable armor against pain. His mind, already predisposed to isolation and distrust, found in dark magic an escape valve and a way to exercise absolute control, not only over others, but over his own destiny, believing he could conquer death. It was there, in the quest to transcend mortality and insignificance through obscure means and in the denial of any weakness, that his humanity began to disintegrate, paving the way for what he would become, a shadow of the man he could have been. With his mind increasingly distorted and focused on a single objective, to become invincible and eternal. The obsession with immortality and the subsequent creation of the Horcruxes revealed the deepest point of his mind, consumed by the fear of finitude. Each Horcrux, a fragment of his soul hidden in priceless objects of personal significance, represents a desperate and terrible attempt to circumvent the natural cycle of life and defy the concept of mortality. For him, death was not a destiny, but an enemy to be conquered. His cruel actions, the manipulation of peers, the murders to create Horcruxes, and the relentless pursuit of more power become calculated tools to consolidate his dominance and ward off the shadow of vulnerability that so terrifies him. Here we can observe the manifestation of exacerbated narcissistic traits, where empathy is completely replaced by the need for absolute control and adoration. Voldemort sees himself as a superior being, a god among mortals, destined to dominate, and anyone who challenges him is an obstacle to be removed without hesitation. Voldemort's language, his arrogant, disdainful, and contemptuous remarks towards others reflect a distorted and egocentric worldview where only his power and survival matter. He doesn't care about the lives or suffering of others, viewing them as mere pawns in his macabre game, disposable in his quest for omnipotence. Let's help the audience understand the internal logic of this disturbed mind, where the pursuit of eternal life and absolute power is not just a desire, but a justification for any transgression, no matter how heinous. It was a fanatical belief in his own supremacy, a pathology that fed on itself. But the true abyss of his psyche, the incapacity to love and form emotional bonds, which made him so isolated and dangerous, remained a mystery, a void in his soul that no amount of power could fill, paradoxically condemning him to eternal solitude. The series of transgressions that culminated in the murder of Harry Potter's parents and the failed attempt to eliminate the baby represented the pinnacle of his quest for power and the final realization of his identity as Lord Voldemort. At this point, there was no turning back. He had crossed a line from which he could never return. His refusal to acknowledge any value in the lives of others, especially those he considered inferior or who opposed him, demonstrates a complete inversion of moral and ethical values. For Voldemort, life became a resource to be manipulated and discarded, and death, a tool to achieve his goals. His worldview became radically individualistic and destructive, where compassion was seen as weakness and cruelty as unquestionable strength. Explore the justifications he might offer for his actions, the rationalization of his violence in the name of an order he believed to be superior, a future dominated by him and by those he considered worthy of living under his yoke. He believed he was purifying the world, eliminating weakness and imposing a new era of power and control, an era without the contagion of compassion. Bring the viewer to the brink of understanding, questioning, what if in his sick mind, distorted by dark magic, he truly believed he was acting for a greater good, his own good, and that of a world purified by his vision? Conclude with the disturbing question that echoes in the air. To what extent can the fear of death and the thirst for power corrupt the very essence of life, transforming a human being into something unrecognizable, into a shadow of their potential? Psychology offers us powerful tools to analyze Voldemort's stubborn refusal to accept mortality. The fear of finitude, or thanatophobia, when taken to an extreme and combined with a predisposition to grandiosity, can result in self-destructive behaviors and the complete denial of one's own humanity and natural laws. His acts of soul fragmentation, the Horcruxes, can be interpreted as a desperate and irrational attempt to exert control over the uncontrollable, death itself. He wasn't seeking the fullness of life, but an empty eternity, devoid of connection. Studies on pathological narcissism illuminate his insatiable need for adoration, his sense of grandiosity, and his profound contempt for the vulnerability of others, whom he viewed as inferior and insignificant. Voldemort not only lacked empathy, he actively disdained it, considering it an obstacle to his power. We can draw parallels with real individuals who, consumed by the thirst for power and the dread of loss, develop dominant and destructive personalities, prioritizing their own benefit above all else. Delve deeper into the analysis, showing how each of Voldemort's choices, no matter how horrifying, follows a disturbing internal logic within his fragmented and distorted psyche. His cruelty was not random or impulsive. It was a coldly calculated strategy to achieve supremacy over his own existence and impose his will on the world. It wasn't rampant madness. It was a kind of cold calculation, an engineering of evil based on his deepest insecurities and fears, culminating in the creation of an entity that was more symbol than living being. Despite Voldemort's fall, the impact of his reign of terror is far from gone. His dark legacy endures in the physical and emotional scars of those who survived his tyranny, in the deep division he imposed on the wizarding world, and in the constant reminder of the fragility of peace. He not only spread fear but corroded trust between people, destroyed families, and left indelible marks on wizarding society that would take years to heal. How could a single individual, consumed by fear and ambition, shape the destiny of an entire magical civilization, bringing it to the brink of annihilation and forcing an unlikely union? Discuss the long-term consequences of his pursuit of immortality and how, paradoxically, this obsession led to his own ultimate destruction. His attempt to cheat death, to become invincible, only hastened his demise and revealed the true strength that lies in unity. Courage and love, elements he never understood or valued, offer a philosophical and moral reflection on the nature of power, the corrosive effect of fear when it dominates the soul, and humanity's inherent capacity, even in the magical world, to overcome the deepest darkness through unity and bravery. Who are we to judge the depths of the soul of someone so shaped by rejection and terror? However, Voldemort's story serves as a grim warning. A cycle of violence and oppression may end, but perhaps the seeds of fear, boundless ambition, and the inability to love may still germinate in other hearts, awaiting the right moment to emerge again, showing that the battle against darkness is constant. The fear of death. The relentless pursuit of a power that would supersede any vulnerability. The inability to love, to connect, to be truly human. Lord Voldemort's story is a dark and complex study of the depths of the human psyche when confronted with its own finitude and the overwhelming absence of affection. We reflect on the devastating legacy of a villain who chose darkness and soul fragmentation in a desperate attempt to avoid life's inherent fragility. It is a terrifying lesson about what happens when fear becomes the driving force of all actions, corroding the soul and leading to self-destruction and the destruction of others. But remember, even in the deepest darkness, the capacity to love, connection with others, and the acceptance of one's own finitude are the true magics, the most powerful forces that protect and define us, and that Voldemort could never comprehend. What is your biggest takeaway from this complex figure?